Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. Once again, we are going to bring you one of our special half-hour mini documentaries. Today, our topic is going to be wilderness. Now, when you say the word wilderness, it brings a lot of images to people's minds. Probably for most, an image like this: rugged wilderness peaks, beautiful pristine valleys, untrammeled by man. But it also brings to the table a lot of controversy. So today, during the course of our half hour together, we are going to talk about wilderness, its definition, the scope of its impact. We're going to talk about the benefits and the challenges that it brings to the table. Our goal in this half hour is to give you the tools you need to engage constructively in the wilderness debate. Now, to get started, if you're going to debate wilderness, you need to understand what it is. So we begin with the definition of wilderness. On September 3rd, 1964, during the second session of the 88th Congress, wilderness was given an official title and a definition. A wilderness, in contrast with those areas where man and his own works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. An area of wilderness is further defined to mean in this act an area of undeveloped federal land retaining its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or human habitation, which is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions, in which 1. Generally appears to have been affected primarily by the forces of nature, with the imprint of man's work substantially unnoticeable. 2. Has outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation. 3. Has at least 5,000 acres of land or is of sufficient size as to make practicable its preservation and use in an unimpaired condition. And 4. May also contain ecological, geological, or other features of scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. But more important than the actual definition of wilderness is the actual perception of what it is.
There's also, as I said, this idea of wilderness, and I think that kind of resonates with some people. They think of the frontier history of this area and like to have some notion of what Utah was like before settlement. You know, there's sort of, in some people's minds, this spiritual aspect of it, where you can go out and see what creation was really like before influenced by man. You know, a wide range of values that are tied up in how we use our lands.
It's basically the way the world would look if there were no people here. And it's the way we found it when people first started moving this way. And there's no oil wells, there's no roads, there's no lodges, there's no tracks that have been left by motorized vehicles, maybe footprints, maybe horses. And it's just as nature left it.
Wilderness is designated as a way to protect areas of beauty for future generations. The idea is that if left alone, without man's intervention, it will remain safe and natural.
What's the best tool that fits the circumstances, that protects the values we're trying to protect here? Wilderness turned out to be the best tool for that.
I think in some cases you could call wilderness a form of benign neglect, because essentially you draw a fence around a parcel of land and you're not really allowed to do much management at all. That would include vegetation manipulation, for example, if you have a disease or an insect problem on the forest. Your ability to manage that natural occurrence is severely limited. It is the most restrictive land management designation known to man. And if you asked folks what wilderness is, they might see, well, what I see when I drive down Highway 15 on the way to St. George.
Much of the contention in the wilderness debate comes over land designations that have been created to protect the land for future consideration as wilderness, such as wilderness study areas for the BLM roadless initiative lands for the Forest Service, and more recently, the controversy over the proposed wildlands initiative. These land designations were created to protect land from any development until Congress could vote on deciding whether it should be wilderness. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about the creation of these land designations and talk about the way that they are holding lands in trust until the Congress can vote on a permanent wilderness designation. We'll be back with more of the County Seat.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
The best part about raising children here in Vernal and the Uinta Basin is just the smaller community that makes you feel like when you go somewhere, you know everybody.
It's not too big, it's not too small. We're close to the Wasatch Front if there's anything we need out there.
The support is unbelievable. Even though you don't have a kid playing high school football, you go to Friday night football.
My job has offered me the ability to college educate all three of my children.
My father, he was an engineer for Chevron, retired 39 some odd years. And Jeff, my husband, it's the same way. He's always worked in the oil and gas, always had a job here.
It's a wonderful place to play because there's a lot of variety between hunting, fishing.
And the beautiful mountains, and Flaming Gorge is just a short distance away.
One of the big reasons why I live where I live is I'm able to run up to a beautiful place like this and spend some good quality time.
There's always plenty to do in Uinta County.
In San Rafael country, you'll discover more adventure and excitement than you can imagine. And it's only 2 hours from the Wasatch Front. Find gorges that descend thousands of feet, trails that go on forever, and the solitude of finding a place all your own. Emery County and the San Rafael Swell. We're closer than you think.
Welcome back to the County Seat, our special documentary on wilderness. Now, so far, we have discussed the definition of wilderness and what it means. In this segment, we would like to discuss the designations that were placed temporarily on land to hold it in a pristine state long enough for Congress to determine if they wanted to declare it as wilderness. The only problem with this is these temporary designations have now been in place for almost 30 years.
Congress has the domain to designate wilderness, we do not. But when we, the BLM, look at wilderness study areas, which is a first step in the direction of wilderness, we look at three things. The things that we look at is the size, which is 5,000 acres contiguous or more, acres or more. We look at the naturalness of the area. Is it really natural with very little man's impact on the landscape? And then we look at the opportunities for really providing outstanding primitive recreation. If an area has those three criteria, then we say from the BLM perspective that they are into the category of a potential WSA or Wilderness Study Area.
The Wilderness Act of 1964 originally did not include any land supervised by the Bureau of Land Management. At that time, those lands were designed to eventually be sold, shifting them from federal ownership to either private or state ownership. In 1976, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, known today as FLPMA, changed how the federal government managed public lands. From that time forward, the mindset of sale and disposal changed to retention and management. A point of contention among many Western county and state leaders is that under the Land Policy Act of '76, land use planning by the Bureau of Land Management is supposed to be consistent with state and local land planning. However, many Utah leaders have found that their plans were pushed aside and altered seemingly from one election cycle to the next.
In effect, FLPMA said, we're going to quit disposing of these lands, but we promise not to manage these lands in a way that would be contrary
to the management issues and policies of states and local governments. That was the consistency requirement. And that's the way Congress bought off on it. Because the notion would be that, well, even though the United States is going to retain title, the states and the counties would still retain regulatory authority. Just like you own your house, yet your house is subject to planning and zoning requirements of a city or a county where you live. Well, in the same sense, federal lands are like any other lands. The property owner is subject to regulatory oversight. And that's the county's big complaint nowadays, is that regulatory oversight has been eroded. That promise of FLPMA has been slowly taken away.
I think what is frustrating for many people is that with wilderness study areas, and people say, well, we think, we believe, well, let's pontificate on it, and then it stays in kind of this limbo stage for 20, 30 years with never a resolution. It becomes de facto wilderness because nothing else can be done.
Nobody thought in '76 that we would have wilderness study areas today, let alone the millions of acres of WSAs we have all over the West. Everybody assumed, and rightly so, that Congress would make a decision about which of these lands met the definition and then designated, and which lands were better suited in another designation and released.
Well, you have to preserve it in that character until you get to that process, or you've lost it. And that's not the way the process is supposed to work. The process is supposed to preserve it in its wilderness state until Congress makes a decision. Part of the problem is that when Congress creates wilderness, it acts. It makes an act and everybody knows the outcome. If wilderness study area just is left in limbo for a long period of time and Congress doesn't act, then everybody is kind of left in the lurch as to, well, is this wilderness or is it not? Are we going to be able to develop it? Can those of us who think it ought to be wilderness, can we relax?
Utah State Representative Mike Noel worked for the Bureau of Land Management for many years before he became a state legislator opposing many of the new regulations the BLM supports. And from his perspective, he contends that FLPMA changed the BLM.
You know, I started with the BLM prior to the Federal Land Policy Management Act. I started before it was passed. So essentially what it was the grazing agency and the lands agency was in the process of disposing of the public lands and selling them. And this compact that was agreed to with, or this agreement in Washington, D.C. with the Sagebrush Rebellion and the Federal Land Policy Management Act was a multiple use concept. And one of the key factors of that is that the food and fiber and resources on these public land should be developed and used to benefit all the citizens of this great country. That's right in the act right there. And it started out since '76 and into the '80s, and that thing changed. And what it changed to was a more of a non-multiple use. As they changed their agreements and they changed the things that they promised the people of the sovereign state of Utah, that we would be able to develop these resources, that we would have access to these lands, that if we needed to sell something off to management, we could do it, but we would manage these lands mainly for the benefit of the people of this state, along with the people of the nation.
Over the last 3 decades, evidence of that shift has manifested itself in both legislative and administrative actions that go far beyond the 3.2 million acres originally identified as wilderness study areas. The Roadless Initiative to identify and convert non-conforming forest lands into wilderness by removing road access. The perpetual sponsorship of the controversial Red Rock Wilderness Bill, which would place over 9 million acres of eastern and southern Utah under wilderness protection. And most recently, the Wildlands Initiative, which sought to identify and manage as wilderness additional lands above and beyond the original wilderness study areas. Many Western leaders fear that the perpetual re-inventory will eventually remove most public lands from multiple use.
If it's going to be an acre hunt, if there's no standard for what can be designated as wilderness, if you can justify wilderness designation for a flat piece of sagebrush Utah that's no different than the flat piece of sagebrush Idaho, then we're facing a situation where we will never end this fight.
Another question is, do we need formal legal wilderness designation for those experiences to be available? Well, there may be other ways that we can identify lands that are maybe not appropriate for full development without going down the path of designating them formally as wilderness.
Those who oppose such large tracts of land being declared wilderness also point out that if you were to actually designate 9 million new acres of wilderness in Utah, that would be equal to 20% of the entire land population of the state. They feel that's too much. But there's much more to consider than just size when designating wilderness. It also has an impact on the local communities that surround it as well. And those are the things we'll look at when we come back with our special on the county seat.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Miller County.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
I didn't order this. Compliments of the lady in gold. Hello, trouble.
Anything worth doing in this quiet little town?
You look like the kind of man that could show a girl a good time.
You strike me as the kind of girl that likes a manicure and a massage.
How's that for a manicure?
I hate golf.
I was hoping for something a little more vigorous.
Vigorous, I can do.
And I thought you'd be riding side saddle.
What? I'm gonna regret this. How about that manicure?
Welcome back to our county seat special on wilderness. Now, to this point in the show, we have talked about the definition of wilderness. We have talked about the special designations that have been used for potential wilderness. Now we have to look at the recipient of the impact. That is the community that surrounds wilderness areas. There is, without a doubt, a significant impact on gateway communities. Just take a look at this.
Wilderness does have economic impacts. It prevents us from other economic uses of the land. And so I know that there are a lot of local communities and counties in Utah that are concerned. They have a hard time generating the revenues to provide necessary services for their people. We have a hard time in Utah raising the money to educate our children because of the amount of public land in Utah that's not taxed. So the more restrictions we put on the land, the more restrictions there are on our ability to provide important services for people.
As a policymaker for the state of Utah, when 2/3 of your land is locked up and not available for any kind of property taxes, mineral extraction, job development, you cannot balance the budget, you cannot meet the needs of the school children, higher education, Medicare, all the things that we have to do as policymakers, you cannot do it on 1/3 of the property.
It's wrong to say that there's no economic activity from wilderness, because there are. They draw tourists, and that development is sustainable, theoretically, forever. It will always be there. It will always continue to draw people if it's well managed. Whereas you have the industrialist way of looking at the land as something to chew up and spit out. And I think we're starting to move away from that, from the idea that if a land hasn't had a hole dug in it, then it's worthless.
For many, the value of these untrammeled areas goes far beyond dollars and cents. There is an emotional connection that affects both sides of the wilderness argument.
These towns that have been here since the white man came across the Mississippi have developed a relationship. And it can be as simple as being able to access the land for fishing or an afternoon of hiking or hunting. Now, when you change that relationship, you fundamentally change the culture, you change the community, and it's something that's unquantifiable.
We should all care about these places, not just care about the public lands that we find special, but care about the surrounding communities. We want them to be viable.
I personally do not believe that it is the economy against the environment or the environment against the economy. It is finding the balance between the economy and the environment. Wilderness, I believe, has a tremendous value to the citizens of Utah. The value sometimes does not equate to dollars, to a financial accounting value. But I believe that it is part of our heritage. It is part of our American spirit to be able to see the natural world as it really was, as it really should be for generations to come.
The perspectives from the different ways that we view wilderness point out that the values are not tied directly to a measurable economic benefit. But the question remains, how much of each type of designation is needed to fulfill the many different desires?
A lot of our citizens need to reconnect with the land. We in Utah BLM really believes very strongly that recreation is a way to reconnect our citizens back to the landscape. Our call and our charge from the BLM is to provide multiple uses, no matter how small the group may be and no matter how large the group may be.
As you can see, with the impact wilderness has, the communities that surround them have to be part of the equations. So the question remains, how do we build a bridge that will bring all the parties together in the wilderness debate and create a solution that's a lasting one for everyone? We'll look at how one county did it when we come back.
Rediscover your sense of adventure. Welcome to San Juan County. Discover the past. A change of place. Utah's San Juan County, where life is elevated. Are you looking for a getaway, a place to beat the heat, crowds, and find adventure? Get to the point. Just get off I-15 in Beaver, Utah, and head up State Route 153 to Eagle Point Resort, a year-round destination nestled just outside the community of Beaver, Utah. Get to the point. Eagle Point Resort.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our discussion today has been about wilderness in the state of Utah and really around the West. We wanted to wind down our discussion by talking about how communities deal with the problem. One county in 2009 became the first in the state of Utah to actually pass a land bill. It was Washington County. And while not everyone was pleased with the outcome, at least it did solve the question once and for all as to what is wilderness and what isn't.
There's been a lot of discussion over the years about what to do with these public lands and finally making decisions about creating wilderness and creating some permanence. Creating some finality to the discussion is important.
Well, it's a big political discussion. Everybody's involved. All the environmental groups have got their needs. Counties, of course, local government in Utah has got its say.
Detractors of these land bills contend that by allowing local input to designate future land use will be self-serving to the community at the expense of the greater good to all Americans. Yet, in reality, Local planning brings some very valuable things to the table.
The number one thing a county brings is local knowledge of the area. Nobody knows the lands like the local county. They know who is playing in their backyard. They know what uses are appropriate and what uses aren't. A county is more likely to devise a wilderness boundary that's completely manageable because they know the land so well.
I think it gives you a lot of stability in your county to know where your wilderness is and your wilderness study areas. Hopefully some of them can be released. You know, we actually ended up with quite a bit more wilderness than we originally had in wilderness study areas.
While many people on both sides of the wilderness debate felt that the Washington County bill failed to live up to expectations, it did prove to be valuable for other counties engaged in the process.
Well, I think what the Washington County bill does is it gives you a template. I mean, we certainly can't just copy and paste the things that they've done in totality, but there were principles that came through that process that are going to be really applicable to us.
Not every county is created equal. Not every wilderness area is created equal. Years ago, I was involved in many statewide efforts to try to resolve this on a bigger level, and those proved simply to not work. This can't be a political fight. This can't be just done in Washington without involvement. Yes, these are public lands, and national public voices need to be heard, but local voices also need to be heard. We need to bring both of those together and try to find solutions.
You know, what we don't want to see is what's happened with the Grand Staircase, where Clinton came in the dark of night and designated most of Kane and Garfield counties as the Grand Staircase National Monument, and 0 people in the state had any ability to have any comment or make any suggestions or do anything on it.
What is needed for us to ultimately resolve this debate is a realistic look at the land we live upon here in the West. We need to see it for what it is and not what we wish it to be. But we need to be honest in our assessment of the land, its history, its pristine or unique nature, if it has any, and the application of the standard that Congress, not wilderness advocacy groups or land planning bureaucrats, desire.
This is not Alaska, this is not Siberia, this is Utah, and a lot of things have gone on here. The lands have been used by people for many decades, and we got to recognize that fact and actually decide what is best. Is wilderness best, or is actually actively managing the land best?
Thank you for joining us today on our program about wilderness. And I hope we've been able to give you the tools that will help you get engaged in the dialogue that needs to take place for us to be able to find a solution to wilderness. Because as long as this remains an argument between those who think that we should develop everything and those who think we should develop nothing, we will not find a sustainable answer that will serve our generation and the generations to come. Get involved. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on the County Seat.